When I first started looking at it, the approach that I try to take is assume that there's an issue with sudo. When I started looking at it, I told myself I'm going to find a vulnerability in sudo. Magical things happen when you keep pushing. So especially in this case, so when I found it, I kind of did a double take. I'm like, there's no way that just worked.
In the world of technology, heroes are everywhere. They're overcoming disruption, delivering sustainable outcomes, and fearlessly forging the future to solve what's next. Join me, Ed McNamara, as we meet the people and businesses driving change in our constantly disruptive world. This is Innovation Heroes, a podcast brought to you by SHI. 12 years. That's how long a vulnerability quietly sat inside the code that powers almost every Linux system on the planet. Undiscovered, unpatched, just waiting. It was buried in sudo, a command most users never think twice about, but one that controls who gets access to the deepest parts of a machine. Root privileges, system-wide control. In the wrong hands, it could have meant millions of compromised devices, servers, routers, critical infrastructure. No password required. No log left behind. But it didn't land in the wrong hands. It landed in the hands of researchers at Stratascale. Today on Innovation Heroes, we're joined by Mirch and Quentin Rhoads-Herrera from Stratascale's Cybersecurity Research Unit, the team that discovered and responsibly disclosed not one, but two zero-day vulnerabilities in sudo, including one that has been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. We'll unpack how they found it, what could have gone wrong, and what this discovery tells us about the future of proactive security and the power of human curiosity in an era of automated defense. Rich, Quentin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Rich, I want to get right to the moment of discovery. You found a vulnerability in sudo that's been there for over 12 years. How did you even begin looking there? What tipped you off that something might be wrong?
So when I first started looking at it, the approach that I try to take is assume that there's an issue with sudo. So when I first looked at it, sudo has been around for 30 plus years. It's mature. It's been researched, and there's been issues in the past. The best top researchers in the world have found issues with this in the past, but it's overall fairly stable. So when I started looking at it, I told myself I'm going to find a vulnerability in sudo. No idea, but I have to keep that open mind. And that's probably one of the main takeaways for other people that work in offensive security and enjoy vulnerability research is sometimes you have to let your guard down and just assume that something is there, because oftentimes we can get in our own way. So that's the approach I took. I literally said to myself, I'm going to find a vulnerability in sudo. And I started looking at it.
Do you have to be a pessimist by nature? I mean, it's not like it's a shipwreck where they're like, yep, we lost one. It went down in this general area. Like you're searching for something that might not be there. So do you need to be pessimistic by nature? How would you describe yourself?
Yes, you do, because, we deal with, sudo or even, software that's developed by companies like Microsoft and other big companies. It's easy to say, well, it's been around a long time, it's well, assessed. And like in the case of sudo, they have automation. So basically every commit gets analyzed by static analyzers. They do various fuzzing techniques and different things like that to where they're constantly, getting that coverage on the code. But there are limitations with that. And this is where the human comes into play. And so when I started looking at it, sudo is pretty complex from a code perspective. It's like 130,000 plus lines. So it is open source, and having access to the source definitely helps. But the approach that I took was focused on the dynamic testing. And so what that means is instead of reviewing the source code, which is, complex and thousands of lines, I actually just run the application. And the focus of this research was on the lesser used options. And most people are familiar with sudo if they've used Linux before or even Unix. I guarantee that the options that we found issues in probably they have never used or maybe even never heard of. I've seen comments of that online. Even seasoned people that have been doing this type of work for many years didn't even know these options existed. So that was really the focus of the research. And when I found the first vulnerability, I am basically, when I'm going through the dynamic testing, using debuggers and tracing utilities and things like that. And I kind of work backwards. So I look for interesting functionality or behavior or maybe error messages. And then once I kind of hone in on something, I'll take that and then cross-reference it with the source code and then kind of work backwards from there. So I can kind of quickly find where I'm at in the source code and then see how it's actually being handled in the source code and kind of continue along that process. And it can be a very frustrating process. You definitely hit walls, and kind of how I've succeeded in offensive security is trying harder and getting past those walls, because magical things happen when you keep pushing, and eventually things work out. In this case, it did.
And when those things eventually work out, you have to go and tell someone else, and you've got to be really sure about it, right? So,
Yes.
Quentin, what was your reaction when Rich came to you with the news? Was there disbelief at first? What did validating this vulnerability look like from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely disbelief. I think Rich hit the nail on the head. When we look at different software out there, we expect to see and be able to find vulnerabilities in closed source software, and definitely software that maybe doesn't have the reach and the customer base that sudo has. Not only is it open source and it goes through rigorous testing, but it's also leveraged in every Unix system on Earth for the most part, which is millions of devices. So when he called me, I was actually traveling to New York at the time for business, and I walked into the hotel, and I was actually just really shocked that something so simple, what he found, that has just been lurking for 12 years and no one has ever discovered before. I was really shocked that something that is scrutinized as heavily as sudo is had an issue like this. And I think it underscores really the fact that almost every technology on earth has some underlying issues there waiting to be discovered.
Yeah, I think my laptop just demonstrated that while we were getting ready for this podcast, actually. But in your line of work, like you have to be right when you go public, right? So, how does the team culture work in terms of validating each other's work? And then is there is there ever a time when you're like, okay, like, I don't know if you take a vote, do you like, is there a vetting process before we tell anybody else, because we are literally, Rich, you're our Stratascale's principal security researcher. It's like your entire reputation is built on like this has to be something that, number one, I'm right about, and number two, I can't just like go tweet about this and tell the entire world that there's a vulnerability there. Like, how do you guys work through like, yes, it is time to go outside of the two of us into our team, into our organization, and then beyond? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I mean, Rich and I have been working together so for a very long time now. I think well over 10 years doing this type of work here and in other entities as well. Uh, for us, it's definitely once it's discovered, we have to do some level of validation. So Rich calling me to have a second pair of eyes on what this is that he found is very important to make sure that what we're looking at is actually real. I have found, and Rich has found, vulnerabilities that work in very edge cases, but in the most part will fail and don't really rise to the severity that this does. And so having a second pair of eyes that understands kind of what we're actually trying to accomplish is extremely important. And then on top of that, looking at the impact that something like this has. So looking at how many customers actually use sudo or whatever the technology may be, how easy is it to exploit? Who are we working with? If it's open source, is it maintained by a group of dedicated developers, or is it maintained, or is it no longer maintained? We often find vulnerabilities in software that is no longer, it's end of life, it's not being supported. And so we take all of that into consideration when we look at reaching outwardly to the vendors and to the owners and maintainers of the code to make sure that we understand what really is the risk to their customer base, to our customer base, and just overall at any and everybody on Earth that is leveraging the technology. What is the exposure? And then from there, you're working with very closely with the vendor or the maintainer to help them patch as well as validate the patch. Rich can definitely go into some history where we have maybe not found the vulnerability in last couple of years. I think it was we found F5 reported a vulnerability. Rich and another researcher actually dug into the patch and found bypasses to that patch, and were able to essentially recreate the vulnerability after they released patched code. And we worked very closely with F5 in order to address those issues. So it's really validating that whatever the vendor is about to put out actually mitigates the risk to their clients and to our clients, and then responsibly disclosing that publicly. Because if we found it, we're not the smartest people on earth. There's someone else that's also looking at the same thing. They may have already found it. And so responsibly disclosing that in coordination with the vendor it's just as critical. So we don't want to provide too much information that makes it very easy, although with the innovation of AI and everything else, like weaponization of vulnerabilities is really quick. But we want to provide enough detail to arm companies to really mitigate and reduce the risk as much as possible.
Rich, I'd imagine that from a layperson's perspective, the fact that it's still there means that you might have made a discovery. That's got to be the fact that it hasn't been patched, the fact that it is still there, number one. Number two, if it is still there, do you ever think to yourself, like, me and a bad actor might be the only people that know about this right now? It's like, I don't know, to me, that seems like a pretty exciting thing when you have that eureka moment. Is that fair?
Oh, definitely, yeah. So especially in this case, so when I found it, like I kind of did a double take. I'm like, there's no way that just worked. Like, and then, part of the process I go through is validating that it's actually real, double checking, triple checking. And even after doing that, I still could not believe that I had found something in sudo. And that's when I had reached out to Quentin to disclose the first vulnerability to him and kind of walk him through it and have him validate it. And that's, when we go through this process, I've reported lots of vulnerabilities over the years. And the last thing I want to do is waste, vendors' time, open source or not.
Right.
So really oftentimes finding the actual issue can be quick, but going through that process of validating and making sure that it's a legit vulnerability and it's not something you maybe made a change to the test environment that induced the issue. So it's really important to go through that process. Otherwise, you end up wasting time.
Yeah, when I was reading about your discovery, I'm like, man, that's like finding another star or another galaxy. It's like how did you do that? How did you know that it was new? But like, we'll save that for another time. So let's get into the impact, right? Like, for those who aren't familiar, what exactly does sudo do in a Linux system, and what would it mean if an attacker had exploited this before a patch was released?
Sure. So sudo is really the primary utility used to delegate privileges. So if we think in like a business or enterprise type environment, before, it used to be either root or you're a user. If you have the root password, you have full access to the system. Well, from a security standpoint, that doesn't work very well for large environments. So if you need to delegate privileges to like your developers or database administrators, you can give them access with very fine control over what exactly they can run, and you don't have to disclose the root password. So essentially, that's what it does. You write policies. There's also an audit component. So every command you execute through sudo is logged, so you can review the history. But essentially, that's what sudo is used for, is to control and delegate access to minimize the amount of privileges that you have to give out to the users and the business.
And this wasn't just 1 0 day, it was 2, and the second was even more severe. Can you walk us through what made these vulnerabilities so dangerous, and how widespread are they?
Sure. So the second one was found the day after I found the first one and disclosed it to Quentin. And it was found actually pretty quickly because I was focusing on options that are lesser used. And what makes the second one more impactful is you don't need a sudo rule configured. You just need access to the machine. So for example, the first vulnerability dealt with the host option. For that to be successfully exploited, you have to have an actual configuration set, which you could find in like an enterprise environment, but most environments may not have that set. The second one, you don't need pseudo privileges at all. You just need to have access to the machine, and that's what made that one definitely more impactful because all you need is access to the box, and you can run sudo. And these were logic bugs, so you could run the exploit and gain access to the full access to the system where maybe you have no access to the system. And particularly shared environments or basically any environment where users can log into or have the ability to log into, those systems could be completely compromised with by leveraging sudo.
And Rich, you mentioned that this discovery was partly instinct, partly research. What was the actual method you used to find it? We've got a business audience, but we also got an IT audience. So when you were testing, like, how did it go from curiosity to confirmation? Like for a real technical audience out there, what was that process?
Sure, I kind of touched on that earlier. So the way I typically focus is on dynamic testing, where I'm actually running the application and running the commands. Sometimes I'll hook up a debugger like GDB or use trace utilities like the strace command, and I'm really looking for interesting behavior. So this is a command line driven application, so I'm passing it parameters, turning different options on, and then observing the behavior of that. If I add an option or put a specific value in, what changes? Is there a different change? And essentially, I'm looking to see if can I influence the application in some way. And the more impactful issue with the change root was it wasn't as simple as like you can just run the command and then see that there's interesting behavior. It was actually a multi-step process. So if you're just simply looking at it from that perspective, you would miss it. And I think that's partly the reason why other researchers have missed it because it wasn't as straightforward as the first issue. And it took several steps. And then basically when I'm looking at an application and I see interesting behavior, by interesting behavior, that could be, oh, maybe I get a permission denied, or maybe I see it open a file or do something like that. And then I say, okay, what can I do to influence that? Can I change it? Can I point to something that I control? So you kind of go through this process. It's not a checklist. It's kind of unknown. And that's one of the main things I like about this type of work is it's the discovery aspect of it and the learning aspect of it is really fun. It can be frustrating, and I could have easily just not found anything. But as you go through this process, you learn a lot of techniques. You learn more about the application itself, and you can apply those same type of ideas and techniques to other applications in the future. So one of the things we like to say, failing is actually a good thing because when you're failing, you're really learning. And this, podcast is talking about example of a success, but I fail more often than I succeed. But that's okay because that's part of the process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was when you were talking, I was thinking of that Dennis Hopper line from the movie Speed when it's like you're not reaching your potential because you're stopping the bomb from reaching it. And I think you would disagree with that 100%, right? So because that and you do just need to succeed a few times to make a huge difference here. But we'll turn to Quentin now. You mentioned this is why you invest in offensive security. Like, how does Stratascale use this kind of research to stay ahead of criminal actors? And what role does it play in SHI's cybersecurity offering? And by the sound of things, beyond SHI?
Yeah, absolutely. So offensive security research really highlights for us like what emerging threats that we really need to pay attention to, what type of vulnerabilities are out there that we need to get ahead of from our for our clients, right? If we look at offensive security, it's supposed to be the proactive aspect of cybersecurity where we're identifying vulnerabilities and exploits before criminals leverage that. It's a necessity because if we're always trying to respond to the vulnerabilities that others have found or it's being exploited in the wild by criminals, we're already kind of behind the eight ball for our clients. And so with us doing our own research, not just in offensive security, but in vulnerability space and the threat intelligence space, we can start making informed decisions on behalf of our clients on how they can further protect their organizations, their client data, their employee data, as well as non-clients, other organizations within the world. So for us, it's very important that we take the research that like Rich and others find and adding that data into our threat intelligence service, into our vulnerability management service, and or even our modern SOC service. How do we feed that data back so we're proactively helping clients secure their infrastructure as quickly as possible? And that's what our goal is for SHI at large, and as you said, really beyond that as well. How can we give back to the community and help the community get better? In the open source, example like sudo, working with that developer, we're not just helping SHI clients, we're helping every organization that leverages sudo. Or if we're looking at vulnerabilities in any other closed source vendor, we're helping them protect. And in some cases, we end up actually helping advise them on how they can look for that in other aspects of their applications or source code. There's been multiple 0 days that Rich and I have found where the vendor has taken it upon themselves to start looking at all of their products to see where other vulnerabilities may exist so that they can close it. I personally think they do it because they're tired of hearing from us, but it really helps their underlying client base become more secure. And so for us, like you said, Stratascale is going to continue, SHI is going to continuously invest in research and in uncovering these types of threats before they become weaponized by criminals.
Yeah, they're tired of hearing from you, and you guys are loving every second of making these discoveries. So I'll take that because you guys are on our side. So I really like the sound of that. Actually, Quentin, you noted that the window between discovery and weaponization is about 15 days. How do you manage that timeline responsibly? Especially knowing that criminals are watching the same blogs and the same pieces of information that are out there.
Absolutely. I mean, number one, right, working very closely with the vendor to coordinate disclosure, coordinate patch, discovery if the patch that they're implementing is actually valid, are there workarounds? So really working hand in hand with them to make sure that when we do publicly announce this, their clients have a foolproof way of mitigating or completely eliminating the risk through a patch. So that's kind of core. That's the number one. Number two is really holding that information tight before that point, right? So making sure that individuals that have found it, there's a need to know basis. We use kind of that TLP or the traffic light protocol methodology in order to contain kind of what we found so that we can control who knows about it and making sure that we're not inadvertently disclosing information ahead of time. But in the back scene, we actually are starting to look at mitigation. So when this one came out, the contributor or the maintainer of sudo is one individual from my understanding. So there's only so much one person can do. So Rich and I were looking at, are there other ways that we can actually mitigate the risk and inform our clients if for some reason this were to get out before a patch was implemented. So we looked at different methods and techniques to help them mitigate or detect this type of abuse. So I think that's also almost equally as important as working with the vendor of getting a patch. Like, are there ways that we can implement threat detections or mitigation strategies to prevent clients from being abused? Because someone else probably has known about this in some capacity and probably have held on to it. And we're really sad when Rich found it and notified the vendor that it needs to be patched. And so for us, like really working with our clients hand in hand and making sure that they can be as prepared as possible if they were to fall victim.
Yeah, they were really sad when the Joshua password was removed. Right? I always love that scene where he's going to type Joshua in and stop missiles from flying. But anyway, well, my movie obsession aside, what's the bigger takeaway here for IT leaders and CISOs? Like, is it about faster patching, better threat intelligence, or is it something deeper about the nature of cybersecurity today? I'm not sure who wants to take that one.
Yeah, I could take a little bit of that. I think for the most part, we have to look beyond just automation, right? There are a lot of great automated tools out there that will find vulnerabilities, potential areas of risk and misconfiguration that absolutely work. But really, at the end of the day, there are business logic flaws and other very hard to find issues that none of these tools are going to pick up. So I think from a CISO's perspective or the business's perspective, understanding that and investing the time and money appropriately. So investing in automation, but also taking the time to upskill your individuals, giving them the opportunity to research on their own, dig in, and leverage the community to source threat intelligence and emerging areas of risk. Very, very important because tools aren't going to solve all of our problems as much as I would hope it does. So we have to be aware of that. And I think on top of that, we really need to have a better community around cybersecurity, better discussions. And there are a lot of these, like SANS has a bunch. There's a lot of organizations that have meetups. And I think it's really important for companies to partake in some of those. The amount of information you can get through community in the cybersecurity world, through research, or even just individuals giving a TED talk at some random meetup is really impactful. I've been at random meetups in Dallas where there was a researcher dropping a 0 day right live in front of us that had major impact to the world. And
Hmm.
so participating in the community and really digging in and building a network that can help you stay ahead of the threat actors, because they're doing the same thing we're doing. They're researching new threats, they're weaponizing those threats, and they're using it for their criminal activity. So we need to do the same, and we need to have a network that allows us to talk and disclose information amongst us.
Let me just say that from a Stratascale and SHI perspective, so I've been at SHI for 28 years now, and I just want to say that like we're extremely proud to have you guys who are doing this kind of discoveries like under our umbrella, because that is simply, in my opinion, and there might be an IT guy in Stratascale or SHI who's going to hate me for saying this. Like, I don't know that this would have happened, but before you guys, joined. How does it benefit, the work that the two of you are doing, like within the Stratascale organization, within the SHI like umbrella? I mean, you've been making these discoveries before, but is it different? Are there advantages, to doing this, within an organization like Stratascale, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of SHI? Like, and feel free to comment with, like your boss is listening or anything like that. But how is it doing that here? Is that a good benefit to you guys, and is it a great benefit to, our, tens of thousands of customers out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a significant value and benefit to doing it here at Stratascale and SHI at large. I mean, Rich and I've done this before at prior organizations, and we've struggled to get focus at times on research and really pushing the boundary. But for individuals like us, really moving the needle forward in cybersecurity is very important, right? Staying ahead of criminals, innovating where we can to help defend our organizations that we shop at, or that are our clients, or that our kids go to their school, right? Looking at how we can defend all of that is very important in pushing the needle forward. And so here at SHI, I mean, we have the plethora of information around our supported OEMs, our vendors, our client base, understanding where they're at and on their journey in cybersecurity. All of that information, as well as the very talented individuals in a company the size and experience of SHI, has definitely paid a lot of dividends to our research and where we focus. It's open doors. It's given us access to things that normally are very hard to get access to, as maybe a smaller organization. And so, and also, being the cybersecurity division of SHI, Stratascale allows us to really push that innovation that's very important to us forward. How can we stay ahead as much as possible to criminals? I don't think we ever will stay fully ahead, but how do we at least get neck to neck and start identifying issues that will definitely pose risk later on? So there's a lot of value, doing this within Stratascale and SHI. And I think we're just, obviously, we're going to continue to invest in that and grow it, because I think there's tangentially a lot of value to our clients by doing this, and a lot of differentiation to how we're actually helping our clients secure.
Rich, anything to add to that?
Yeah, and one of the things that I really enjoy about this type of research is I get to share it with people, not only the world but also internal teams. And when I discover something like this, they get the information slightly ahead of time, and but also I get to show them the techniques and the process, which is really the more important part of it, because they can use that, in their roles too. So that's the part that I really enjoy of it, and it's nice to have the support from leadership to be able to do this. And it's fun, but it's also very rewarding from that perspective.
What's the reaction been when you guys went out to the? I mean, you followed the protocols. It was validated. To me, it's really big news, but it's even bigger within the community of people, who do what you do. What was the reaction when you went public?
So I was definitely keeping an eye on that and had different conversations with a variety of people. So it was very interesting to see kind of the community response to it. and it was overall, very positive, and they're very, very interested to see, the research, and they appreciate, being shared. And also another kind of cool thing to observe is other researchers were taking the work and kind of making their own spin on it. So that was pretty cool to see. And they're also kind of doing their own detailed analysis. That was kind of like across the board. There was some content creators that were covering it. So it was pretty neat, overall experience. And it's nice to interact with the community. I got to meet some people through that process. So um, it was definitely, well received, and definitely had, a decent amount of visibility, because of it being pseudo. And it's always nice when someone can take, work that I did and learn from that too. And that's kind of the other rewarding side for it for me, is to see, the manifestations of my own work and seeing my name, you know, on their websites. Definitely interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Um, one last thing for anyone listening who wants to work in cybersecurity or break into adversarial operations. What's your advice? How did each of you get into your field? And I suspect I know the answer, but what's the single biggest characteristic you need to have to do what you do?
So I'll go first. So I got into this field. My core background is IT. I've been a sysadmin. I'm still a sysadmin today. That's what I love to do. I run servers. I do all kinds of tinkering. So that well positioned me to get into offensive security. I didn't really know that at the time, but when the opportunity came up, it wasn't something I was actively looking for. Someone had actually forwarded me the opportunity and said, "Hey, this looks, right up your alley." So I kind of followed that path, and it worked out. And then I realized how much my admin and IT background helped in security, because at the end of the day, security is all about IT. So having experience in IT or development will definitely help. But the cool thing about cybersecurity is I've seen many people have a variety of backgrounds. So it's not, that's one path, it's a common path, but there's many other paths. So it's not the only path. And the key for me, and I go through a lot of interviews for offensive security, is what I'm looking for is that passion and the drive,
Hmm.
and showing that, because in this line of work we often don't know the answer. We don't know necessarily what to do. It's not a checklist, like I said before. It's something you learn, and that's really the key thing, is having that passion, showing the learning, and doing the various things like training. There's so many free options and low cost options these days, so there's really a lot of information out there, which can be overwhelming. But that's the main takeaway for me, is it's a constant learning process. So if you want to break into cybersecurity, it's about the learning and showing that passion, and eventually you'll get your break.
Quentin, you have the last word.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what he said. I mean, the drive and the passion is super critical for offensive security more specifically. I got into it because I was, running a little security team, and PCI compliance came across my desk of like, hey, we have to meet this standard, and pen testing was part of it. And I just fell in love with the puzzle aspect of pen testing and adversarial operations. It's just a giant challenge, which really fit my love for puzzles really nicely in a professional way. And the way I got in though is through the drive of learning. Like I would work 8 hours, 9 hours a day at the office, and then I would come home and do another 4 to 5 hours of just studying offensive security, understanding what I was doing, was going through coursework. And so when I look for those who want to get into the space or are already in the space for working on the team, like I look for that drive. Do they have the drive to continuously learn and fail and pick themselves up from failure and really learn from that and grow? Because you will fail more times than not in pen testing, which is good for clients, right? If they want us to fail. And as well as the passion. Like you have to have the passion, because you can only bang your head against the desk so many times before it becomes almost punishment at that time. So having the passion to see it through and continually drive on and learn, like that's very, very, very critical and important. In pen testing, we're often coming across technology we've never seen before, come across, maybe don't deal with quite a lot. So we have to do a lot of research, and we have to do it in a very limited amount of time. And so being able to have the passion and drive to do that is very, very important.
Passion, drive, and you guys have far surpassed the 10,000 hours to become experts in this field by the sound of things. So that's I'll throw out that other one in there as well. Today we heard the inside story of a zero-day vulnerability that could have changed everything, but didn't, thanks to the kind of expert ethical research happening inside Stratascale. It's a reminder that cybersecurity isn't just about tools or alerts. It's about people who are curious enough to poke, bold enough to dig, and smart enough to disclose responsibly. A huge thanks to Rich Mirch and Quentin Rhoads-Herrera for joining us and sharing their story. If you want to learn more about these vulnerabilities or the work Stratascale is doing, check out the links in the show notes. I should mention again that Stratascale is a wholly owned subsidiary of SHI, so if you are an SHI customer or prospect listening to this and want to learn more, reach out to your account team. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and stay ahead. I'm Ed McNamara. This is Innovation Heroes.